Homeostasis. I've used that term a couple times now. So let's look at what that means because it's super important. It's the difference between being able to manage someone's care so that they retain being healthy and productive, as opposed to allowing some imbalances to take over, corrupting some of these 11 organ systems which we just looked at, and resulting in disease states. The other thing we need to look at is the concept of feedback. Feedback is going to be how the body monitors its homeostasis, whether it's in balance or out of balance, and allows the body to sense what types of adjustments it can make, if it can make any. We need some stuff in order to live. The survival needs, they're basic components that you're probably already very well aware of. But we got to remember that all things in moderation, right? Too much of some things can actually become toxic. Too little of some things means that there's a starvation mode or deficit. And so some of the things that we'll look at and will be recurring themes in anatomy and physiology, as well as later on pathophysiology classes, will be nutrients, oxygen, water, body temperature, and of course, being able to operate at normal atmospheric pressure. Again, now kind of think about each one of these components in deficit. So that's the easiest one to imagine. Oh, if you don't have enough nutrients, you're hungry, you're starving. What about oxygen? Oxygen, not enough to breathe, suffocation. But think about it inversely. Think about it in the too much. So too many nutrients can result in things like obesity, can result in things like toxicity. And too much oxygen is, quite frankly, toxic. It rests your body from the outside. Oxygen is going to steal those electrons, and once they do, it can cause major irreparable cell damage as well as DNA damage. So homeostasis, let's get back to it. So homeostasis is maintenance, keeping things between a gradient of what's healthy. I don't want to say normal because normal is very different for very different people. And always remember that when you're dealing with your patients. Homeostasis is the range of healthy, that gradient. It's not usually a pinpoint like data point. It's like there's a little bit of wiggle room on either side, which is a great development because it allows us to have that flexibility to adapt to our environment. So it's internal conditions that we're mainly worried about. And so the external environment is what we kind of need to control for. If it gets too hot outside, we're going to need to sweat and release some of that heat. Our blood is going to need to flush to the top part of our integumentary system in order to release that heat out of the body. But what if it's too cold? Muscles moving and burning can kind of help raise that body temperature up, right? So get shivering, start like making those layers work for you. So we'll look at some of these states of equilibrium and disequilibrium and how that kicks into how we need to read and monitor using these feedback systems. Oftentimes when your patients are coming in, they're going to come into you and they're going to be out of balance. Something's not going to be right. And by looking at the feedback systems and which types of systems or, what part of their physiology is non-homeostatic at that moment will help you effectively diagnose, treat, and develop a care plan for them. So here's kind of just the way they all seem to want you to think of it, which is the teeter-totter model. This is the teeter-totter of the teeter-totter model. So the teeter-totter model is three main regions with 5 key steps. So balance is homeostasis. It's where you want to be. When it's tipped one way or the other, meaning there's too much maybe in terms of nutrients that are taken in, so now we're toxic, or maybe there's too much oxygen that we're breathing in, so now we're starting to have different types of issues. We look at what is the stimulus, what's changing the environment so that we're having now a change in our organ systems and we're falling out of homeostasis. What detects that change? Who is going to tattletale on the teeter-totter of homeostatic balances? That's going to be your receptors. That's usually things like your nervous system. Most of the feedback systems that we have are negative feedback systems. It turns out the squeaky wheel does get the grease. It'd be so great if they were more positive ones, but we don't have too many of those, probably it explains a lot of the addiction, drug addiction in humans, but again, we'll get to that when we start talking about brains. So the receptor detects the change, and usually it detects it in something uncomfortable, such as pain or itch or anything like that, or just sleepiness or whatnot. The receptor reports in an input, and that's what we call an afferent pathway. It means we're affected. I'm so affected with an A by this sensory input. The input goes to a control center, usually your brain, usually. And what your brain does is it sorts out what's going on. What is this horrible pain? Where is it coming from? It's on my arm. Is it hot? Is it because it's burning? Is it because it's itchy? Did I get a bite? And it starts kind of asking questions like, what is this? And then it thinks, what can I do to stop it? Return to homeostasis, realign balance. And maybe that's something as simple as moving away from the source of pain. Maybe it's something like, oh, it's too hot, and it's actually, because we're outside in the heat, so we're going to start sweating, right? We're going to start using evaporation to cool us off. So that's known as an effect, or an efferent pathway. It's effecting, it's doing something, like cause and effects. The body in some way that it's starting to be able to regain and control homeostasis. So effect with an E, right? So affect with an A, oh, I'm taking it all in. Effect, oh, I'm doing something about it, right? Okay, an output is whatever the information is that the control center has decided is going to fix the problem or get it more closely to fixed. The response is the final outcome. What happens? Usually, we're hoping that it restores homeostasis and brings us back into balance. So again, receptors, these are the sensors. They monitor the environment, and the environment can be on the inside of the body or the outside. Is it hot outside? Is it 96 degrees outside? Or did you eat too much hot sauce on your burritos earlier? It's like burrito day. It's because it's probably Tuesday and I'm thinking of tacos, like so much tacos. Anyway, it's going to respond to the stimuli, right? It's like it's receiving the stimuli. It's going to allow us to respond to the stimuli is what I meant to say. So the control center, it's up in the brain usually. It's when we're starting to say, oh, this variable has changed. I've just taken in some information from my receptor. I got to figure out what to do about it. Let's do this. The effector, right? The effect is going to take the information from, or the instructions really, from the control center and change something. Maybe it's our position. Maybe it's what we're sweating. Maybe it's some other methods used by the digestive system to alleviate issues with hot sauce. Whatever it's going to do, it's going to allow for an environmental change in some way to bring back that internal homeostasis. And remember, we have two kinds of feedback that we're talking about. Most being stimulus are typically what we call negative feedback. So we get something that we don't like and we need to respond to it to alleviate the discomfort. However, a positive feedback loop is when you're encouraged to do something. Ooh, this feels good. This feels right. This tastes delicious. I can't wait. I'm going to do this more. Right? That's a positive feedback. You want to enhance the stimulus. You want more of it. So finally, homeostatic imbalance. We're gonna spend most of this class talking about A&P classes are always talking about the good stuff. This is the sunny side of the street, right? When everything's working hunky-dory perfect, that's A&P class. When things are messed up, when you have disease states, that's going to be your pathophysiology class. We'll look at a few case studies of homeostatic imbalance in order to understand our systems a little bit better. Also, most of what we do know about our organ systems and our physiology in general comes from understanding how they broke down in the first place. Right, so where were we? I should look at this slide. There we go. Okay. So of course, disturbing homeostasis, it's going to lead to an increased risk of disease. So what is disease? Disease is being out of homeostasis. It's a breakdown of an organ system, tissue, or cell in a way that may not be recoverable, and it can lead to further damage, especially if left unchecked. Disease is what all of these receptor and effector feedback loops are trying to avoid. when someone falls into a disease state, that's usually when they start seeing you and managed care is appropriate. There's a lot of things that can result in disease states. Often it's habits, sometimes it's inherited disorders, but we're also learning a lot of stuff comes just simply with age. And environment, definitely environment. Right, so an example of a disease state would be heart disease, right? The lack of function in the heart due to corrosion of arteries and the vasculature. Eventually, the heart's going to have to pump harder, try to compensate for that, and it distorts its overall shape, it scars. Over time, constantly scarring and distorting its shape further leads to heart failure and eventually death. So let's try to avoid that one. All right.